Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, don't forget, July the 11th, 12th, 13th, Ardmore, Oklahoma, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. Our theme is how we know, or how to know, we are not living in the last days. Make your plans to be with us. Okay. We are continuing our examination, our review, response, our refutation of Brock Hollett's book, Debunking Preterism. We are focused at the present time on his comments about the Olivet Discourse. And be sure here on YouTube to tune in to my own series on the Olivet Discourse that I've just begun. It will be an exhaustive study, and a lot of the things that I will say will be a more in-depth analysis of the discourse than I'm able to give here in these brief responses to Brock Hollett. And it will expose the incredible error and presuppositional, just bad logic that Brock Hollett exhibits in this book. And today's video, which is number 9, in our examination of his book, I must tell you, is one of the more disturbing chapters, or I should say paragraphs, that I have read in his book. I'm going to read, it's actually a quite lengthy paragraph, but I'm going to read it to you. You really have to focus in order to catch the subtlety. I would almost use the term the deceit that is found in this paragraph. And I don't want to be unkind. But the comments made in this section, in this paragraph, are very disturbing. Quote, Jesus was operating within the normal limits of biblical expression by describing, quote, the temple, unquote, without any numeric qualifier in the Olivet Discourse to speak of the third temple. Now keep in mind, Brock Hollett affirms that in Matthew chapter 24, although it's not explained and even though it's not mentioned, Jesus is talking about 2 temples to be destroyed. The temple to be destroyed in AD 70 and a yet future eschatological temple that will be destroyed. Now, he admits that Jesus does not mention those things. But we now know they're true because of our presuppositional theology. Oh, well, okay, enough. To continue, quote, we know that the Jews who lived, now you've got to catch this is amazing. We know that the Jews who lived during the Second Temple period conceived of their own temple as a continuation of Solomon's temple because the scriptures describe its construction simply as the rebuilding of the temple. And he gives several verses. Similarly, Jesus answered the disciples' questions regarding their own historical circumstances and the looming destruction of their temple by providing a prophecy concerning the desolation of the eschatological temple that will precede his glorious appearance. See, he's just slipped in the third temple. Jesus answers the question of the disciples about the destruction of that temple, but then he gives not much. He's really describing the destruction of the temple immediately prior to his second coming. Even though he admits the disciples didn't know that. To continue, preterists are historically anachronistic when they require Jesus to have used the numeric qualifier third to reference a third temple, especially given the fact that such an understanding, while the second temple stood, would have undermined the knowability of the timing of the Lord's return. Unquote. This is so deeply troubling. Number one, he says Jesus was simply using the normal language of the time to refer to the temple. He didn't have to use the language of the second temple, the number second. But did you notice that Brock Hollett refers to that as the second temple. Jesus didn't have to, but Brock Hollett does. And then he says, the Jews of Jesus' day, who lived during the second temple period, conceived of their own temple as a continuation of Solomon's temple. No, they really didn't. The Jews of Jesus' day often referred to the temple of Jesus' day. Scholarly sources verify this over and over and over again. Brock Hollett's own terminology confirms it was the second temple. But you see what Brock Hollett does, he goes back to Ezra, Haggai, and Matthew 26:61, where you just simply find references to the temple. And he says, see, they didn't use the term second temple. Therefore, Jesus didn't have to use the term second temple. I tell you what, folks, this is awful. When Ezra was in the process of rebuilding the temple, what temple was it? Guess what? By Hollett's own definition, it was the second temple. But you see, Ezra did not have to refer to the temple as the second temple every time he mentioned it. What type of a journalistic requirement is that anyway? Brock Hollett has no right to demand that any reference to the temple after the Solomonic temple was destroyed be referred to as the second temple. And that's demonstrated by the fact he himself uses the term second and third because he knows the temple of Jesus' day, which the Jews of Jesus' day could refer to as both the temple and the second temple. And he uses the term third temple because he knows it's not the temple of Jesus' day. Period. And so when Brock Hollett tries to so very subtly say, well, Ezra didn't use the term second temple. He just referred to the temple. Well, it was the temple of his day. But what did the historians, both ancient and modern, refer to that temple as? Second temple. And what does Brock Hollett refer to his proposed future temple as? The third temple. Not just the temple, he delineates it from the second temple. So on the one hand, Brock Hollett wants us to believe that, well, if the Jews wanted to refer to the temple as second, they would have used the term the second. They didn't have to do that as contemporaries of the temple that was standing. When Jesus said, do you not see all of these things? He didn't have to say, do you see this second temple? No, it was the temple of his day. But historians chronicling the building and the fall of the first temple and the building of another temple referred to it as the second temple. This is the worst kind of subtlety on the part of Brock Hollett. When Jesus was walking out of the temple, what temple were the disciples pointing out the beauty and the size of the stones? Were they pointing out the beauty and the size of the stones of the temple? Well, of course they were. When Jesus said, do you not see all of these things? What things? The things that they were seeing right then, right there. He didn't have to say, now look, I want you to know, I'm talking about this, these stones of this second temple. He didn't have to say that. They knew it. They understood it. And so for Brock Hollett to impose some kind of an imagined, invented, contrived journalistic rule that says, well, look, Jesus didn't refer to it as the second temple. Therefore, since he just simply referred to it as the temple, then we are at liberty to say that he wasn't even talking about that one. I'm sorry, folks. This is really, really bad. And it's so presuppositional, and it's ironic, and it's contradictory because, again, Brock Hollett goes ahead to talk about second temple, third temple. He uses the terminology and says, well, the ancient Jews wouldn't have done that. Well, the historical Jews, the historian Jews did. But the contemporary Jews on site didn't have to. That's the bottom line. A final point here. Unrelated to a certain extent, but I do want to get this in because I don't necessarily want to devote an entire video to this. Preterists vehemently reject the historic church's position that the Olivet Discourse is concerned with the events that are future to the modern reader. Look, once again, this is awful. Brock Hollett is ignoring the fact that patristic writers, and I don't rely on patristic writers, but in this case, you need to know that Brock Hollett is misconstruing things. Tertullian applied the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27, and the fulfillment of all prophecy to AD 70. Eusebius applied Daniel 9 to AD 70. On and on. We could verify this. In fact, in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, I go through the patristic writers, the key chief patristic writers, Chrysostom, Athanasius, and others, and document where they believed and they said that the Great Commission had been fulfilled in the first century, the Great Tribulation was in the first century, the abomination of desolation was in the first century, the completion of the world mission was in the first century. Now, Brock Hollett says, oh, well, preterists ignore the early church historical view. No, we don't. We point out they believed, by the way, Eusebius believed the Lord came in flaming fire in AD 70. Does Brock Hollett believe that? No, he says he's on the side of the historic church. Not in this regard, he's not. Now, were all of those men still futurists? Yes, that's not the point. The point is, did the patristic writers apply Matthew 24 and these things that we're discussing about to AD 70? And the unequivocal answer is, yes, they did. Mr. Hollett has misconstrued the patristic evidence. And again, I document this completely in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order this book. Be sure you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping, saving you $5. Okay, well, thank you so much. Be sure to join me again on Monday as we continue our examination of the Olivet Discourse. You have a safe weekend. God bless. We'll see you then.